Welcome to the Motherhood Alliance podcast, the podcast dedicated to empowering moms and families on their health and wellness journey. I'm Brittany Suttner.
And I'm Andrea Rankus. Together, we're here to explore holistic approaches that go beyond conventional medicine.
Each week, we dive into topics that matter most to you, everything from nutrition and mental health to alternative therapies and natural living.
We'll bring you the expert interviews, insightful discussions, and practical tips to make motherhood a little easier and help your family thrive.
Please keep in mind that this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to replace the advice, diagnosis, or treatment plans you have with your personal healthcare team. Please have a conversation with your trusted healthcare provider prior to making any changes or implementing any strategies or advice you learn from this podcast.
Whether you're a new mom navigating the early stages of parenthood or a seasoned pro looking for new ways to support your family's well-being, you're in the right place.
Here at the Motherhood Alliance podcast, we challenge the status quo, ask the tough questions, and offer a supportive community for moms who want to make an informed, holistic choice.
Thank you for joining us on this journey.
Let's get started. Hi, we are Britt and Andrea from motherhoodalliance.com, and we are excited to welcome you to a 4-episode series with Karen Kieffer, a licensed independent clinical social worker and certified transformational nutrition coach who specializes in trauma, PTSD, anxiety, and depression, with a current focus on those who are preparing to become first-time parents. Karen is the owner of Snowfields Coaching and the creator of Embodied Dialogics, an approach designed to help individuals and couples work through childhood trauma before a baby arrives so they're not carrying old patterns into the next generation. Her work is highly individualized and shaped by decades of experience in mental health systems, education, community development, and leadership. What makes Karen's perspective especially powerful is that it's grounded in lived experience. After navigating her own lifelong trauma and later a cancer diagnosis that prompted her to stop postponing the things that mattered most, she returned to school in her 50s to become a clinician and build the kind of support she wished had existed earlier in her life. We're really excited to share Karen's expertise and experience with you. Let's get started with today's conversation. Hello, everyone. Welcome to a brand new series. We are excited to welcome Karen Kieffer to the mic. Hello, Karen. Welcome.
Hello there.
We're excited to have you here, and we're really excited to dive into this first episode of your series. In our episodes 2 through 4, we're going to be getting into some really awesome detail of your expertise. But in this story, we're going to be hearing your story a bit because you have an amazing and interesting story, and we're going to start with your fun fact. So I know you're going to be touching a bit on this in your story because this is more recent in your life. But when you got diagnosed with cancer, your fun fact is that you found out you could not get enough of the color orange, even though your whole life you've had other favorite colors. Tell us about this experience and why do you think this is?
So I first noticed it in my kitchen. I was preparing to spend 2 years on the road living in a van and working.
Oh, wow.
When I was diagnosed with cancer. And so I had bought all this gear and I started putting it in one place to organize it after I was in a phase of buying all the stuff that I needed. And I noticed, there's this overwhelming, weird, deep yellows and tangerines that just aren't me, I thought, right? So it was just really puzzling, but I just loved the color and it felt like nutrients in my eyes.
Interesting.
And so, there's all kinds of science about color and mood and all kinds of things like that I'm not an expert in. But I can't help but think there's so much science there about how light affects us and wavelengths of light. I mean, I don't know why. I don't really have an answer to that, except that somehow it matters in a way that I don't know.
That's really interesting. So you go to the store, you buy this stuff for your trip or for your life or whatever on the road, but instead of the greens and blues that you normally would pick out, you pick out the oranges and the yellows and things like that. Interesting.
Yeah. And I think in the moment I thought, these are the options of colors. I'll choose that one. Or maybe I was thinking that my normal color I would like probably wasn't available, but I don't think that's true. And I bought them all separately. It wasn't all at once. So it's when I put them together that I thought, what is going on here?
Does this still apply today?
Actually, it's been shifting very recently. I'm back to my greens and blues. I paint. And so I still use a lot of the oranges, but in combination now. So I don't know, it's feeling different.
It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, let's rewind quite a bit. We are going to talk a little bit more about your cancer journey at the end of this episode. So tell us about your upbringing, and then as well as like where did you get started in your career? Because I believe it's shifted a bit to where it is now. So tell us about your story from the beginning.
My career is shifting. That's what I do. I grew up in a big family. I'm one of 7 kids. And we're very spread out over 18 years. So I had a lot of older siblings to watch and learn from. And from the time I was in kindergarten, I wanted to be a veterinarian until I was 18 or 19, I think. That's the only thing I thought about. Everything I did was to prepare for that because I do things intensively. But then when I got to the university, all that changed for reasons out of my control, and I had to start all over again. And it was very strange, and I feel this now when I see people ask children, what do you want to be when you grow up? And it's like, don't do that to them. I feel like they get in their head that this is important to be like they should know when they're 5. And if you don't know, I don't know. Maybe people don't do that as much anymore, but it was like the one way that adults engage with children
They still do.
in the 60s or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I just really got that in my head it was kind of my identity. So when that fell through, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I'd been studying animal agriculture. I studied meat science. I studied zoology and environmental toxicology and women's studies undergrad. So I was really interested in food systems and health. I was introduced to all kinds of alternative health things then, and I was training. I was doing triathlons. And
What was the picture like then? Like what types of alternative health were you learning about in this
And this
time?
was what time frame was this?
This was in the mid-'80s, early '80s, mid-'80s, and just learning about other ways of thinking about health besides the traditional medical things that I grew up understanding, that there were other things that our mainstream science didn't teach us about. So as a child, I was diagnosed as hypothyroid when I was 10. So I've been dealing with that issue for a long time, trying to figure out what do I need to do to get all my systems to function properly, because I had a lot of issues. And that coincided with this onset of kind of like a depressive state that for most of my life I lived in. So it was a lot of exploration of new ideas about health and how we define it. And I was also very interested in the social wellness piece of health. Like, what does it require socially to promote health? I was very interested in public health. During that time, I was also working to support refugees who had been displaced from the Civil War in El Salvador and to help them move back to their communities. So I was part of a movement that helped people do that. And I got very involved in that. And I did go to school to get a master's in international environmental policy, and I was studying climate change.
Wow, you got a lot of different things that you're interested in doing.
Yeah. So I was looking at how to address that on a local level because it involves all these things. How do we create community that supports people's well-being, their creativity, their ability to be a free human spirit and be well and get along together. All those things have, really I've cared about. So those were all big influences on me. So when I went to grad school, I did my master's research in El Salvador because I wanted to know these communities they were incredible. Like, why are people who are in the middle of a civil war, they're poor, they're being bombed, why are they organizing around empowering women and, sustainability of farming? Like what? How do they do that?
How do they have capacity to look beyond survival?
Why is that so more important? Yeah.
Exactly. In the middle of that kind of thing. And, stories of we just meet people. And I remember this woman who talked about how all 8 of her children had been killed during the war. And the average person had lost 7 relatives in the war. So, there's a lot of pain and suffering, and still with all that. That was fascinating.
And I know you also have a background in some leadership type things. So is that farther down the road in your story?
Yeah.
Or is okay.
So I ended up marrying a Salvadoran that I met during my, time there. And that was a fascinating learning period. So, and I guess the theme here is learning everything. I moved to something new because I love learning new things. And then I go, oh, that's changed what I think is important.
Sure.
So now I'm going to go do this other thing because that seems so important. And that's been the one thread through everything. Yeah. So then we moved to Boston, and it was very difficult change for both my husband and me, because he had never been a person who just wanted to come to the United States. So no job, no English, very isolated, and it was really challenging for him.
Do you have kids? I
have one daughter.
Okay.
Yep. I had her in El Salvador. But yes, through those times, that was a really difficult time of neither of us really being supported and having the skills and the personal development to make something like that work. So, yeah, that was challenging. I had an older brother who had had a baby 6 months before. So he was sending me all kinds of hand-me-downs. And one was a book. It was the Sears book on, I forget what it was, but I learned about attachment parenting. My life was so chaotic. I was so unprepared and unsupported in so many ways that I think that saved us.
Yeah.
And saved my child.
So at what point, you have a cancer diagnosis, you have a new career into actual helping people and as a clinical social worker. Let's bring ourselves to that point.
Yeah. So in 1992, the first global meeting for climate change was supposed to happen, where we were hoping for all these outcomes. We were going to change things. No good things or important critical things happened. I went into a terrible depression then, because I was like, the world is over. Everything is downhill from here. And along with lots of other things, like, for example, I didn't know I'd married an alcoholic, and there was domestic violence in there. Earlier in college, I'd had a sexual assault and all kinds of things, and they just caught up with me and just boom. And so I was on disability for 12 years for depression. And in trying to get myself out of that, I had support from a family member who coached me, knew nothing about mental health, worked with businesses, and coached me. So after that long, I couldn't go back to anything I'd ever done before. And I found this volunteer job in peer support, where there was these new peer support centers in the mental health system. And I went to basically do administrative work, and I got, why don't you get certified in this? So I did. And then, because I'd had a lot of job experience, I was in demand for a system that was trying to bring in people with lived experience to improve the mental health system. So boom, that was my next career. So my job turned out to be, that I spent about 7 years doing, was creating space in the mental health system for peer support, which is not a clinical thing.
Sure.
So, a lot of learning there. I did a lot of staff training and development, trying to teach, people and learn and work with people to create, these new practices. My job was researching kind of like the cutting edge treatments out there and bringing them into our system. So that's what I did after that.
So what triggered you to become a licensed social worker then and get some of these schoolings? I know you went back to school in your 50s.
Right.
So what triggered that?
Because I was seeing in this system, I worked in the state system. So we saw all the different services that a state provides. And so many of them, it seemed like we're not able to help people or understand people who had trauma, and many different kinds of trauma, but especially childhood trauma. And more, we're trying to contain them or punish them for behaviors without understanding where they came from. So that's like containment instead of healing. So, which is also important. for some people because there are a lot of people who need support.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I would bring, along with a very close coworker, we did all this work together. We would bring this information forward and try to introduce it in terms of how to do this practically in your everyday thing in whatever environment you work in. And people say, you don't know what you're talking about. You're not a clinician. You don't know what this is like.
In reality, you probably know more than any clinician fresh out of school,
Well, I knew certain things. They had certain experiences that were also valuable. But I was kind of trained in peer support to not validate those experiences either. So I said, well, okay, what am I going to do next? I've gotten to the end of the road of what's possible here. I'll just go be a clinician. It wasn't a reaction necessarily. I've learned all this stuff that I think is valuable. I'm not the genius. What I do well is put things together in a way that other people can understand and use. That's if I have a genius, that's what it is. I didn't create all those things. And I thought, these are going to be really valuable. What can I do with them? So I became a clinician, and I did use all those skills and put them together in my own way that eventually I called Embodied Dialogics. And it does help people more quickly than a lot of things I've ever seen. And yes, I do wish that was available to me then, but I don't think the research and practice had developed enough with understanding the nervous system and trauma. That's been like recent developments that came out of research. It's only like 30 or 40 years old, really.
Can you explain just real quick Embodied Dialogics? Because we mentioned that before, and you just mentioned now. We'll talk about it in more depth in, I believe, in a few episodes.
Yeah.
But can you just give us an overview of that real quick?
So when lots of people think about therapy or treatment, they think about talking about your problems and talking about the terrible things that happened to you, and then somehow somebody's going to do something and things will be better for having talked about it. But in my experience for many decades, no clinician, no treatment ever helped me. I went through ECT, all kinds of drugs, all kinds of things. None of it helped me. And so, of course, then you think, I'm so damaged, nothing works. So this is just who I am and how I am. But I learned that didn't have to be true. So putting all those things together and learning about what is going on inside us, like what our emotional and physiological basic operating systems are like, once you understand that, then you use your cognitive mental abilities to figure out how you're going to intervene with that. All of those systems, your nervous system and all that. So it's understanding, it's a dialogue internally. Then you understand something new, you apply that, and it's a constant back and forth of a dialogue, an internal and external dialogue about learning about yourself and having principles that help you know what is the next thing I want to focus on for myself, because we are an infinite onion, right?
Yeah.
We will always be changing and adapting to things, but there are basic injuries or patterns in yourself that you can change relatively quickly that cut down on the pain and suffering in your life.
I'm excited to dive into that more
in
our next episode for sure. But to finish out this one, so now you have this clinician credentialing, you've gone back to school, you've even developed this own program of yours, and then you get hit with a cancer diagnosis. So where were you at? Were you done with your schooling? Were you already like clinically practicing when you got this diagnosis? Tell us about this piece of your life as well.
I started practicing as a therapist. I'm a clinical social worker. You spend a couple of years being supervised. And I started that in 2018. In 2022, I got diagnosed with cancer. And so I was doing work in a mental health clinic. I took time off after that for treatment, and then I went back to work later.
How are you doing now?
I'm doing good. I've gone through several rounds of treatment. I'm on my third remission, and I'm living, making plans every 3 months, according to what the scan says, every 3 months.
How do you feel like this diagnosis has kind of changed your life outlook?
I think it does what I feel like everyone should already be doing. There's a wonderful book by Stephen Jenkinson called Die Wise, And from him, I learned, he used to do training for nursing staff on palliative care. And he would ask them, so do you know you're going to die? And everyone sits around the table rolling their eyes. Well, of course we know we're going to die. And he said, well, how would anyone know that if they observed your life? Because when you really know that and you're living it, you make priorities. You know your time is limited. So what are you going to choose? You have to say no to things and make priorities to live the life that is meaningful to you. And I think if people could do that, it's so hard to imagine that you're going to die. I mean, it's just such a hard thing because we don't talk about it in our culture. It's something we avoid. We think we can outrun it somehow, but everyone's facing it at some point, at some level. So I think that really helped me. It's okay, how do I want to use this time? And that's why I made my priority this year for working with new parents, because healing our childhood stuff and breaking the patterns, that's going to change the world. It's hurt people out there doing a lot of harm. So, I mean, in terms of what skills and knowledge do I have that could impact the world in any way? That I think is the biggest one.
Wow, you have had so much experience. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. We do have 3 more episodes coming up with Karen, and I think it was so important for her to share a bit about what she's been through and her experiences for us to be able to dive deeper into these topics. Because I know in our next episode, we're going to be talking specifically about that piece with first-time parents and why you really love that niche and why parenting feels harder now than ever before. In our next episode after that, we are going to be diving into the Embodied Dialogics. So I'm excited to learn more about that as well, because from all of your experience, I can tell that you have a depth of knowledge in this arena. It's going to help a lot of people. And then our last episode together is going to be kind of interesting twist, you guys. We're going to be talking about psychedelic therapies because Karen has some experience with this. She's able to help people understand if this is something for them or not. And then if they choose that it is, she can guide them through it. So we're excited to just learn from you in this area because we've never had a conversation about that on the podcast. So we have a lot more episodes coming up with Karen. We're excited to dive in to her expertise next. If you enjoyed this episode, would you consider leaving a rating or review or sharing it directly with a friend who could benefit from the information? We know that you're a busy mom or caregiver, and our goal is to make your life easier by bringing tips and tricks directly from experts into your earbuds. By sharing this episode with someone you love, you can play a critical role in helping to make their life easier as well. We appreciate your time, and thank you for being a part of the Motherhood Alliance family.